All right. So it is about that time. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you all are in the world. We are just so excited that you have decided to spend your afternoon with us, or your morning, or your evening, learning about building your college list. So before we delve into our conversation during our time together, there are a few housekeeping notes that we want to ensure that you are aware of. This particular Zoom session will be recorded. And so if you happen to be in school or on vacation or on the way to work or whatever your responsibilities or engagements are, just know that this particular recording will be available to you after today. And so just know we look forward to engaging with you in that virtual space. It is also important to know as well that we want to hear from you. So you will find that there is an active Q&A feature as a part of this Zoom, whether you are using your mobile device or your laptop or even maybe a tablet as well. Please feel free to submit your questions as we will be moderating these conversations and we will be answering many of your questions live today, especially if you are coming to this process as a rising junior, a rising senior, or maybe a parent, or guardian, or high school counselor. We want to hear from all of you as well. And again, of course, we acknowledge that several of you are in different parts of your college journey. Some of you, you're getting your feet wet a little bit. For many of you as well, you are embarking on this process in the next month or two. And so we want to ensure that you are equipped with all the information that you need. And wherever you are in the process, we are just so glad that you are here. And so before we begin today, of course, we want to introduce ourselves. My name is Janessa Dunn, and I am the Director of Admissions here at Skidmore College. And I am joined today by my wonderful colleague, Mindy Rose, who will be able to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad you've joined us today. My name is Mindy Rose. I am one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Skidmore. I'm also a member of the class of 1997. I spent a lot of years, though, between when I graduated from Skidmore and when I returned roughly 2 years ago, working in independent schools as a college counselor. I've worked in boarding schools. I worked in a day school in California and an international school in China. So I'm hoping to be able to bring to you tonight or today some of the learnings that I gleaned from my 17 years as a college counselor.
Excellent, excellent. And we're so excited to have a conversation this evening, Mindy. And as you all have heard, Mindy has a wealth of experience working with students from a wide variety of backgrounds in different school settings. But of course, at the end of today, we want to ensure that you have the information to empower your own building your college list process. I will share with you, of course, that we have some questions that we would love to ask you, but please feel free to use the Q&A feature because we will certainly want to infuse your questions as we are navigating this process. And so let's go ahead and just start off a little bit, Mindy, and let's talk about where do I start? If I am a high school rising senior, rising junior, where do I start? What advice do you have to even commence this process?
Thank you for that great question, Janessa. And that is often the first question I hear from rising seniors, rising juniors, parents, just depending on where you are in your college process. Knowing how to start and build momentum is the first thing to understand. So, my advice is to think about your college process as like a large capstone research paper that you've become accustomed to doing as you move your way through your high school experience. So, in that way, I want you to think about what works for you organizationally. Are you somebody who loves digital folders? Are you somebody who prefers paper? Are you someone who's really visual and you might find that photographs or other visual triggers are useful to you? Think about how you are as a learner and be prepared to apply that same lens to your college process. And at the same time, think about how your college process really is a capstone moment for you whether you're just starting to conceive of what this might mean for you, or whether you're moving into the actual application stage in earnest, you're going to want to think about all of the skills that you've learned in high school: critical thinking, strong writing, and especially how to evaluate sources. Uh, and you're going to move all of those learnings to the college process. Some students, especially when you're moving into the senior year, some students can find it really helpful to think about their college process or their application process as almost an additional class. Sometimes that feels burdensome to think of it that way, but to a lot of students, it feels really helpful to know, well, I know for my classes, I spend this much time on it in any given week. So if I dedicate a similarly structured period to my college process, I know I'll make progress. So that's where I recommend you begin. First, by really beginning to frame the college application process and list building as an extension of your high school work already, and think really seriously about what works for you in high school and apply those learnings to this work.
Excellent, excellent. And Mindy, I'm so glad that you were able to talk a little bit about how to compare building your college list to an academic class or an academic experience. And I know sometimes that can feel a little bit overwhelming because look at it, we're in June, and it may
Right.
be wrapping up the summer or wrapping up the semester for the summer break. And so the last thing you probably want to hear is, okay, I have to take another class. But I think one of the beautiful pieces about this process, just as you mentioned, and the very first thing that you mentioned, Mindy, was what is important to you? How do you best learn? Do you prefer learning by having a sheet of paper on a pen, using a pen, for example? Do you prefer using your notes section on your phone to jot down notes? Do you prefer to soak it all in and to gather as much information as possible before beginning that processing? And so there's this ownership, right? That comes along through this process. And so, Mindy, as we lean into that ownership a little bit more, can you share a little bit about the role of the student, the role of a parent or a guardian, and also the role of a high school counselor in building on this list? And of course, knowing that many of our students are representing a wide variety of educational experiences.
Of course, yes. So it at its best, the process really is a triad, a relationship between the student who is at the top of the triangle, and then the parents and the counselor, or that may be if that may be a school counselor, it might be an independent school counselor, it may be a CBO counselor, international school counselor. There's lots of different figures in that third piece, but somebody who represents your work outside the family is a really important collaborator um, beyond the parent and caregiver. So for the student is should take charge of their process, because ultimately it will be the student who will be attending the college. And so we really want to underscore how important it is that the student engage in the process of learning about what matters to them and why, what's worked for them and why, because all of those learnings will transfer into a positive college experience. Now, parents and guardians are critical agents in this process as well. One, they know their child better than anyone. They've worked with them or seen them grow, and they can offer really important insights, especially when a student is feeling fearful or nervous of the process. So it can be really helpful for the parent to encourage and say, here's an example when I saw you really flourish, and see if it resonates with your student. The parent can also, it's really important also that the student and the caregivers have really open, honest conversations around expectations within the family. Um, around costs, because costs are certainly part of a different triad that we'll talk about in a minute. And they can also be a logistics center for students. So if you are able, and this is not true for everyone, but if you're able to take time away from work to visit a college, or if you're able to, as you're doing tonight, attend a webinar together, that those are really positive collaborations between student and parent or caregiver. And then the counselor is the voice of the school. They're the voice of what trends look like within the context of their school. They can offer insights into how to prepare the application. It really depends a lot on the setting in which you sit, but your school counselor is absolutely a partner that you want to nurture and build, because they can offer insight and perspective that is really unique to the setting in which you are applying, from which you're applying. One other thing that I want to add about especially parent caregiver dynamics alongside the student, it can be really helpful to devote one day a week to talking about college. That rhythm is really productive because it sets an expectation on the student that they're working, they're making progress, they'll have an update, but it relaxes the student from being asked every day, so how's it going now? How's it going now? What'd you learn today? That is a surefire way towards shutdown for the student. So set aside half an hour a week. Maybe it's Sunday afternoon, maybe it's Wednesday evening, maybe whatever works for you, to get those updates and to keep everybody chugging along in a positive, productive way.
That is excellent advice, Mindy. And just to recount what you've mentioned a little bit, you're talking about the role of, for those who know our students the best, and students, you may have your best friend, you may have your teacher who knows you well within the classroom. And you also may have your parent or guardian or community advocate, for example, who may know your interest in who you are well, but also recognizing again that ownership that you have to share what is important to you, but also the ownership of having a consistent timeline, setting aside that time per week. So that way you know what to look for. You know how to prepare for those conversations. And it's great, particularly the triad, as you mentioned, Mindy, is super helpful. And so there are several different tools, as we think through the ways where we have so many colleges here, particularly only in the United States. And in addition to that, we have students who may be looking abroad for their institutions of choice. And so just thinking through, how does one wade through it? What resources are out there that you have known that have worked well? How does one navigate that?
It's a great question. That's probably the second question that I am asked, which is, are there any tools that I can use to begin thinking about colleges in an objective manner? And none of, of course, in my role at Skidmore, these aren't tools that I endorse. Really, they're more tools that have worked well for me in the past as a college counselor. And I'll start with Coursava. Coursava is a wonderful way to initiate self-reflection. One of the points that you'll hear when listening to any admission officer or college counselor, school counselor, is how important self-reflection is throughout the college process. And that goes back to this point that Janessa made, or that we're both making, about how student ownership is the priority here. So Coursava is a website. It used to be a deck of cards, but it's now a website that students can use to quickly gauge their preferences around around different school fits. So they'll ask you, are you someone who values close relationships with faculty? And you can click on a scale. Yeah, absolutely the most important thing, or I'm okay being more anonymous. And the Coursava goes through unending different criteria. And when you are done, you get a report that says these things are absolutely critical. These would be nice. These I'm kind of neutral on these, and I would like to avoid these factors. So that can help a student begin to understand, okay, I am maybe drawn towards small liberal arts colleges. I can see from this report that relationships are central to how I experience learning. So I can knock out large research universities and focus on small liberal arts colleges. And that's going to knock down your number dramatically. Or it might be vice versa. But either way, it helps you evaluate preference. Um, Sometimes at some schools, if you have Naviance or Score or other learning management platforms, which is what your college, your guidance office has to send your materials to colleges, they will have access to Coursava. So you could ask your counselor. That would be one way to set up a conversation with your counselor. And even if the answer is no, you've used that time to make a connection and to illustrate to your counselor that you're really valuing understanding your own personal preferences. So Coursava is one for sure. I also recommend College Express. College Express, no E, is a wonderful tool because of the way that it sorts colleges by characteristics to which students are drawn. So this sounds, that may sound amorphous, but if you check it out, you'll see. I actually was looking at Skidmore's this morning, and I saw that some of the groupings that Skidmore shows up on is, colleges where you can combine music and business, colleges with happy students, colleges with unusually accessible teachers. And so you can go, once you understand your preferences, go to College Express and say, okay, well, I know that I want to be able to, one of our categories is expensive colleges that can be made affordable. That's one of Skidmore's. You can look at that list and see what works for you and get some new ideas. And then once you do that, I recommend the Fisk Guide to Colleges. This is a book, an old school book that is wonderfully helpful because it has both lovely narrative for any parents who are on this call. Sometimes we talk about it as though it's the Zagat of college literature. If you remember the Zagat guides, they're restaurant guides that would take quotes from surveys to create a narrative about a restaurant. Well, that's true about the Fisk Guide as well. And it's a great way to learn about the particular quality, the kind of ephemeral quality of an institution before getting into the car or on an airplane to visit a school. So the Fisk Guide is something that I recommend. It's written by college counselors, and they're sharing their knowledge with families to understand culture and potential fit.
Excellent, excellent. All of those resources, I mean, just jotting those down is really important to keep in mind. And I'm so glad that you were able to kind of talk through the ways, different actually avenues, right? That may drive a student's decision. It could be I'm starting from, from a super foundational, I have not started this process at all. So I may start off with a Coursera, for example, or a program that's
Mhm.
similar, or maybe I've already done a little bit of research, but I just want to know a little bit more. I want to dig deeper into these spaces. So perhaps the FISC guide may be really important to some folks as well. And so there are lots of different options here, but the internet is a vast tool, right? And so those are just a few examples of the several opportunities and several tools that may be important to our students in this space. And so, as one is gaining, all of this information, how do you sift out what is true, what is not? And how do you make sense of it all? Because this process is complex. And how much should you lean into verbatim what is shared in those spaces?
That's such a good question. The market is saturated with actual experts and kind of so-called experts in college admission. So trying to find the difference between a strong authority and someone who is at worst taking advantage of a vulnerable period in life can be challenging. But this is why we began with sort of framing the college process as a research paper or a major capstone experience, because it can be really important to sort through both primary and secondary sources. So secondary sources look like articles that are written about about what a difficult year it was in college admission because of various factors. And that same headline has existed for my whole career, interestingly. Primary sources are reaching out directly to the college to understand what they're all about, what they value, reaching out to opportunities to talk to students. Like at Skidmore, we have a Discord server that is really a fantastic way to get primary information. And no matter where you gather your information, you have to apply that critical lens. It's been so heartening to me. I actually have a junior, rising senior in high school myself. And it's been so heartening to see the digital literacy that students who are of that age have developed. It's very different than students, say, 10 years ago, where the internet was still a factor, but students were much less savvy about discerning what is a valuable source and what isn't. When it comes to rankings, I would encourage students to think about, and families, to think about rankings as sort of a list of options versus a hierarchical sort of a hierarchical sort of sanction on quality. It can be really confusing and really easy to use rankings in the numerical way they're presented as a shorthand for research, but nothing beats your own research and aligning that research to your preferences. And there's all kinds of research that speaks to what will result in a successful undergraduate education, and none of it has to do with rankings. So think about rankings as a list of options, not a sort of goal to attain a certain number, because there's so much subjectivity.
Thank you for that, Mindy. And just to recount a little bit about what you've just mentioned there, it is a very complex process. One, there are many different types of institutions. You hinted on, a research institution, a liberal arts college. You may be looking at a four-year institution or a two-year to four-year institution, right? There's so many different options, but also recognizing what that primary source of what is driving your process, building your college list, what is most important to you, and also thinking of different ways in which those values are aligned with the research that you're finding. So the way that you mentioned the primary and secondary or even tertiary sources, right? Sometimes a primary resource is a student that you know at that school, right? Who you were able to have that connection, and we want you to have that connection, while also recognizing that that individual person may have an individual experience. And so, is it reflective of the entire student body? Is it reflective of the major that you want to pursue or the ways in which you want to engage in that space? And so it's a compilation of all of the values that you have and that ownership of being able to understand what that means for yourself. So, yes, go for it, Mindy.
Exactly. And so often over the years, people would ask me, what is the trick to college admissions? And the ultimate, it's not a trick so much as it is just virtue. It's knowing yourself and having the intelligence to pursue the colleges that align with who you are. And it sounds so simple, but it's true with anything in life, right? If you're following what you know to be true about you, you're going to have a better um, result than you would be if you're chasing something that doesn't feel authentic to who you are.
That's it. That's it, Mindy. And and especially as you are bringing your wonderful team, or your family along with you, whether that is your parent or guardian, if that's a high school counselor, if that is someone with whom you're working at a community-based organization or an independent educational consultant, bringing them into the fold because these are folks whom you may or may not be, consulting with as it relates to your interest, right? But again, being in that space of knowing who you are, knowing who your primary and secondary resources are, or tertiary, and moving forward accordingly. And so, Mindy, thank you so much for bringing us into to that point. And so, as we continue to navigate, through this process and, building your list, you may have your list of schools, you may have a list of schools that you want to visit in this process as well. But ultimately, when you do make that list, how do you maintain, what's next after that? Maybe perhaps you're starting the application process and you're like, well, I think I align myself to this particular school for these reasons, or I align myself to another school for these other reasons. Like, is it okay to have multiple areas? And can you share a little bit about that?
It is so okay. Sometimes students in the past have said to me, I can't decide if I like research universities or liberal arts colleges. And the answer is it's okay to have both on your list. And similarly, I don't know if I want to study business or if I want to study dance or if I want to study English or biology. The answer is it's okay to not know. There is no uh, disadvantage to you unless you're asked to apply to a certain program at an institution. For example, at Skidmore, everyone comes in undeclared, even if they have a sense of what they want to study. But there are colleges where they ask students to indicate a school to which they are applying, whether it's a business school or an engineering program and so on. Um, One of the first questions to ask yourself is, what is my level of certainty around my potential area of interest? And am I prepared to attend this college if my interests change entirely? Which I know from experience working with 17 to 20-year-old students, change is pretty regular, happens regularly, and it's something that usually represents important growth. So I think that know that it's okay to sit in some uncertainty. And one of your jobs is to evaluate how flexible do I want my prospective colleges to be. Um, because not only am I using the information I know about myself now, I am also preparing for my future self, which is the hardest part of this process for 17, 18-year-olds. It's hard to know what your future self might look like, but you may have some kind of tingling sense. And it's planning around that. It's leaving room to grow. That is really important.
I love that. That's absolutely wonderful. And as you can probably tell, it is definitely a reflective process, right? And it does require some inward work and some dedicated time to really go through. And so, Mindy, can you share a little bit about for those perhaps who are thinking about staying close to home, moving further away from home, maybe even going way far from home, or thinking about all of these different options, what would you say are some of the core tenets of that college or building your list, that one should consider, in addition to the resources that you mentioned?
Absolutely. So location is really important. And I think that especially over the last few years, we've really thought about, and I'm thinking about since COVID, we've really thought about what is our personal threshold towards distance. It's a very personal question. No one can answer it but you. But there are some ways to test yourself around um, distance. For some students, it's really important to them, and this may be one of those parent-student conversations in that piece of the triad. You know, it's really important to them to be able to drive to the college. And for some students, that the threshold for a day's drive might be 4 hours. For some, it might be 6. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just worth thinking about. If I needed to get home, is it important to me to be able to get in a car and go? For other students, they're very happy getting flying, and in that case, the question might be, how many flights might be required from my hometown to get to these colleges that have caught my eye? Is it going to require 3 or 4 legs? Or is this a college that has access to an airport where I feel confident I can make it happen in 2 legs? And again, if you're comfortable flying 4 legs, that's fine. It's just knowing what works and paying attention to what increases your kind of stress level. And just because your stress level increases about one factor now, it may not stay that way. It may be just the initial kind of shock of thinking about life beyond your hometown, whatever that's looked like for you. So, one of the other things to keep in mind with the college process is be prepared for your preferences to shift a little bit. It's unlikely that they change dramatically, but shifting is completely normal, very much expected. So that's why it's useful to think about distance, and there's certainly a cost involved with further travel. But then again, it may be that a financial aid package covers travel. There's so many different factors to consider, and I certainly wouldn't rule out a longer distance because of worries about cost.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mindy. And it's great to kind of keep those in mind. And I'll use an example. I am originally from Alabama, born and raised. And, moving up to upstate New York may be a big jump, right? That's a 14-hour drive. If I wanted to take, that route or thinking of those options. But, this particular institution may have the exact program that they want. It's the smaller arts college, and I'm actually willing to look at it, right? To explore in these different areas. Or you may be thinking about the bi-coastal experience. You maybe want to go out west, for example, or internationally for your experiences. And so, just as Mindy has mentioned, I think it's really important to keep in mind that your interest and your kind of sometimes that emotional process, it will shift, right? Because it is deeply reflective. It is asking, what do you want, right? What is exciting about you? What is driving your passions? And it's all right if it starts off pretty large and then narrows as we continue to progress. We've noticed since the pandemic that some students are, in fact, waiting a little bit of time before making those college visits, for example, or seeing an array of different pieces. Some may be waiting until senior year or after a student is admitted, in that space. And some of you are like, I'm ready to understand now. I want to see what's of interest. But understanding wherever you are in these processes, just to give yourself some grace and space to navigate it and to move forward. And allow yourself to change your mind if you need to before you make that final decision. And so, Mindy, yes, go for it.
Well, I was just going to add such wise points, and one of the best parts, or one of the more positive outcomes of the pandemic, is that colleges have gotten a lot better, Skidmore included, at virtual programming, creating opportunities for students like this event. But this is more of a general event. If you're interested in learning about, for example, financial aid, we have a webinar that introduces families to financial aid. There's just a lot of content that comes not only from us, but from colleges across the country that make it a lot easier to understand the institution before making that visit.
Exactly, exactly. Those digital platforms are wonderful to be able to digest this information, including those who may be watching us through a recording as well. So Mindy, as we continue to go through this college list in this process, of course, it inevitably impacts the actual application, the applying to college factor, right? And so, what are some things that our students or our families should keep in mind to kind of uphold the integrity of the process, or even just beginning that process? Because some folks, it may be simultaneous that they're building these lists and applying, at the same time.
That's such a good question, and one that I hope students will center as they think about what they want to present to colleges and universities. Um, I think a big piece of integrity comes from maintaining the student's own voice and preferences in the process, and really thinking, digging down, kind of being a kindergartner again and asking why, so that you really are understanding yourself and your options in a way that is far beyond superficial. And when you do that, you will be creating a level of detail in your application that can only be original to you. And so I think trying to think beyond the universal experiences of high school and of growing up, and think about how have I lived that? What are some very specific details that I can share that represent only me? And so something that I would say to students when I was on the counseling side was that I should be able to look at your application or look at your essay among a pile on my desk and know that it was yours. And even if there's a group of students whose everything is theater, for example, and they could all talk, if they were not digging down, they could all talk about their involvement in a way that sounds remarkably similar. And so when you um, just move that out to the college, the applications that we see on the admission as admission officers, that universal piece becomes even more saturated in the applicant pool. So one of the best ways you can help yourself now is really thinking about ways in which how you spend your time has shaped who you are in very specific ways.
That's right. That's right. I really appreciate that reflective moment, and especially because for several folks in the Zoom space, you will be beginning this process in a couple of months, and so we want to ensure that you feel as informed and as empowered, throughout this process as well, but also that you can be who you are, and we are excited, to see who you are as well, and so a little bit about my experience. Of course, I'm at a wonderful liberal arts college in upstate New York, but my background is also at a private research university or a larger private liberal arts university or a large public regional university with over 20,000 students. And so there's so many different ways that you can present yourself into those different spaces. And that I found my identity in all of those different spaces, right? It just looks differently, right? And so don't necessarily funnel in too narrowly, because at the end of the day, you will find your match. It is being able to take a look at the spaces that at least meet what your needs are and your values at the end of the day.
I agree with that. And I would say that it's part of the empowerment of moving through the college process to begin to understand I could be successful and really delighted in a number of these different settings. And that is ultimately a reminder of how capable and competent you are as you work your way into your young adulthood. That's a really good feeling. And so, yes, you may have preferences within your list, but your goal is to apply to a group of colleges, all of which you'd like to attend. Now, that sounds silly, but often it happens that students will add to their list colleges that they're not as excited about or knowledgeable of. And your goal is to treat each college on your list as it begins to go from here to here the same. You want to really use similar strategies to research them. And then when it comes to putting together your application, I think it can be useful to think about a pizza. Um, you are each piece connects to the next, 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 until you start going around the pie again. And so when I'm talking about each piece, I'm talking about your transcript, your courses, your essays, any short answers that are required of you, your counselor recommendation, your teacher recommendations. Each of those is a piece of the pizza. Once you start going around the pizza again, you are repeating yourself. It's redundant. Your goal next becomes adding toppings to the pizza. The more layers of toppings you can add, and you can pick your favorite. If you're a vegetarian, it can be all vegetarian toppings. If you're a meat lovers person, it's different kinds of meats. But the layers on the pizza are the details that you use within your full pie, and that's what makes a really delicious bite.
Right, that's right. I appreciate that, Mindy, particularly as you are navigating and building in, this application, right? As it relates to building your list. So at this time, we want to share a little bit about, some different components as it relates to your interest. And so there are a couple of questions here in the Q&A that we are most certainly going to be able to answer. But there are a couple of sites to kind of put into context what we've been sharing today. So we're going to put it in the context of an institution like Skidmore, but you can apply this method to many different institutions, right? And so we think of a place like Skidmore that is located in Saratoga Springs, New York. Some of you may not know where Saratoga Springs, New York is located. And so, being able to be specific about the nature of how close are we to a city center? Being 30 minutes really from of the state capital of New York State, and being within driving distance or a train's ride, for example, from New York City, Boston, and Montreal, Canada. And so being able to think of what is that environment where you would like to be, and regionally as well, especially if we're beginning to tour colleges too. But you may also be driven, in terms of the mission of the college. What is the core value of this institution, if that is something meaningful to you? It kind of goes back to the suggestions and resources that Mindy has mentioned, about being creative, about having really close student to faculty relationships. And so some of you may actually want to do a Google search of that institution. You want to know what is something that stands out? What is that piece? And so for Skidmore, that is creative thought matters. We feel very strongly that regardless of a discipline, whether you're studying business or music or biochemistry or the visual arts, for example, that you can infuse creativity, innovation to do in a way that is without bounds, and to be able to apply it throughout your experience. And so those are things that may be important to you. You may be thinking about what motivates you and inspires you. And this is a reflection of what Mindy led us through a little bit more or earlier during our time together. What inspires you inside and outside of the classroom, not only when building your college list, but also thinking through, for example, how do you reflect on the essay topic that you want to start on? That's maybe really great brainstorming options for you as you continue to move forward. What activities are important to you, whether that is school related, if it's a part-time job, volunteer work, for example, perhaps it may be research. What do you look for in a community? Is it really important for you to be alongside folks who are interested in sports, or those who may be a little bit more introverted and love those small, close-knit communities? And of course, just as Mindy mentioned, do I want an institution that's close to home or far away, right? Or maybe a little bit in between that you're willing to explore a little bit. And then, of course, how much does cost play into your decision making? And there are a couple of tools that I would like to add to what Mindy has so beautifully mentioned. is that every single college and university within the United States is required to have a net price calculator on their financial aid website. It is an excellent tool to estimate the total cost of attendance or the estimated cost of attendance for you to attend that institution per year. It is also important to know that there's another tool that may be a little bit easier to complete, a little bit shorter, called the My Intuition tool, which was developed by a fellow liberal arts college professor here in the Northeast to kind of give you an understanding of, yes, I see this sticker price, but also at the same time, they have excellent financial aid. And guess what? Majority of their financial aid is not in the form of loans. I didn't know that, those kinds of things. And so being able to use those tools, alongside to estimate financial aid before you apply or before you are receiving your admissions decision. So these are different pieces that we want you to encourage you to ask yourself as you're navigating through this process. And of course, just as Mindy has mentioned, that intersectionality of all of these different areas is almost kind of an extension of the triad. Thinking of your academic interest, the cost, which we know is really important to many of our families, the location, the community, not only within the campus, but also what do students do on the weekend? Is it a residential college? Do they stay on campus? Do they engage with the town in which they're located? And we also think about outcomes. What happens after college, right? Where do alums land? What types of roles do they have? Are they going to graduate school? Are they going into the workforce? What does that look like for them? And being able to bring all of these elements into your process. And then finally, yes,
Janessa,
go for it, Mindy.
would you mind going back to the last slide for a second? Thank you.
Of
Um,
course.
and one of the tricky things that you'll see about this Venn diagram is that there's not one spot where everything overlaps so that you feel like there's my sweet spot. So what I would offer is the second triad that I mentioned that I would reference. Um, all of these components, academics, location, community, and outcomes together as one. So I would call that community. Um, affordability. Can we afford this? Whether, and as Janessa said, not necessarily be taken aback by a price tag, but you doing some research to do the net price calculator. So community, affordability, and then the third one is selectivity. Can I be admitted to this school? Which is a very hard thing to assess as a student, but it is a reminder to think about your college list as something that should include a range of selectivities, and that you're equally enthusiastic about each of those schools on the list. So that's the triad that I would invite you to think about, because when you overlap those three, there is a sweet spot in the middle, and it can feel really clarifying.
That is excellent, Mindy. And do you mind re-emphasizing those elements that you've mentioned just one more time?
Absolutely. So, looking at this slide about the intersectionality of the college search, there's a reference to academics, community, outcome, and location. Those to me fall in one category. I would put those as preferences. The second one is affordability. It's another way to say cost, but cost is not as complicated as a word as affordability, because uh, uh, sticker price, for example, Skidmore sticker price is very high. Um, However, we also have an incredibly progressive financial aid policy here. So that may reduce, depending on your circumstances, the cost of attendance. So that's affordability. Can we afford it? And then the third one is selectivity. If every school to which you apply is at a 3% or 5% admit rate, that's going to be a recipe for a lot of heartbreak, even among students who are very, very, very strong. And those are schools that can be hard to, they're just, it's unknown who will ultimately be admitted. So you want to be sure that you're including schools with a range of admit rates so that you will be sure to have options that you're really excited about.
Excellent. Thank you so much for emphasizing those elements, right? And that intersectionality, but also thinking through these different terms, right? Affordability and cost. Affordability is going to go in a step further, and thinking about what those options look like within the context of that school. And of course, that does require research, right? So thank you for that, Mindy. And of course, finally, being able to kind of bring it all together, staying organized is really important. Mindy mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation, for some of you, you may want to have it written down on a piece of paper. For others of you, it may be a Google Doc. Or the note section on your phone, but keeping track of your notes is very important. And in doing so in a way that allows you to continue to build upon it. Like, for example, you're here to engage with us through a virtual session. But there are some in-person opportunities, or you may find a representative at your school or in your area with whom you may want to engage. And also, finally, your support system, that triad, that could be your family, your friends, your school counselor, whomever that may be. But again, having that set time throughout your process, particularly if you're a rising junior or a rising senior, rather, or perhaps going through a gap year, being able to set off that time to engage. So definitely lots of things to think through at the end of the day. So, and of course, finally, being mindful of deadlines. There is a time limit. When it comes down to some of this information. So, for example, as you're going through your process, knowing what those final decision deadlines are. For us, our very first deadline is November 1st for early decision candidates. And if you are interested and you have visited or you have engaged, you're saying, yes, this is my number one school and I'm committed to enroll. If admitted, early decision may be a great option for you. For some of you, it may be an early action opportunity where you are really excited, but you still want to look at your options, right? At other institutions. And so just knowing the difference of what that looks like and knowing your deadlines is very important. So due to the timing that we have here, we want to ensure that we have the opportunity to get to some of these questions here. So particularly, we have a question here in the Q&A from a student, particularly regarding touring colleges. Is there anything in particular that you recommend doing or asking when you are visiting a college?
That's such a good question. And, tours can be incredibly valuable. And they're a way to hear a student's voice generally, sometimes more than one student, depending on how the college arranges their tour guides. And even more than that, it gives you the chance to wander around the campus and begin to make connections between your preferences or your dislikes and that institution. So I always recommend that students who are visiting colleges spend time in the student center. Look at the hangings on the bulletin boards. That can show you an incredible amount about what's going on in a campus community, what the college values. Always, if you can, pick up a campus newspaper. Some campuses print them still, a good number. Some you'll be able to find the information in the newspaper online, but that will give you an idea of any hot button topics that are happening on campus. The student journalists are always on it. They've always got the tea. So you want to look and see what topics have consumed the paper recently. Depending on your priorities, you might ask about campus safety. You might ask if there's a chance, depending on when you visit, whether there's a chance to connect with a faculty member. Often it can be, it's really on the student to reach out to faculty, but sometimes you can get some guidance from either your tour guide or from the admission officers on how best to direct your time. But again, think about it as accumulating primary sources. Your tour guide is but one voice. And if you're lucky, you'll be aligned with someone who really resonates with you and is having an experience from which you can gain a lot. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. I know it was always heartbreaking for me to have a student come back and say they really liked the college, but the tour guide just didn't work for them. Like, oh, that's just one voice. If you find that happens to you, then I would recommend, or even if it doesn't, connect with a range of students through virtual events, different panels. If colleges have a Discord like we do, or some other kind of ambassador chat situation, just keep accumulating information and use that tour as a starting point to kind of situate yourself within that particular college.
That's right. That's right. I love that, Mindy. And I will also, if you happen to be on a college campus, I always like this method. Go up to someone random, like a few people, just a few people,
Yes.
and say, "Hi, I'm visiting today. Curious to know a little bit about your experience," just as a sample, just a
Mhm.
sample, just kind of if you're in a dining hall, or if you're on the quad or outside in that space. That could be a really awesome way to engage a little bit. Now, of course, again, that person may not be representative of the entire institution, but it also could give you a little bit more insight, right? Maybe that secondary or tertiary experience, right? That may be important to you about that community, or what is something that you like most about Skidmore? That's a great question to ask as well.
I completely agree. Reaching out to students you see or faculty, depending just the whoever is around, to talk about their experience can be so valuable, particularly if you're feeling like you're having a hard time understanding the institution beyond the superficial level that's presented outward from, say, the website. No better way than to get somebody unscripted to talk about what they think and what they're experiencing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are a couple of questions here in the chat that talk a little bit about the application process. And, this is a simultaneous process. So it's a twofold question, and I'm happy we can both answer these. And so the first is, when should you apply to colleges? How much time should you give, as you are approaching this process? And is it better to submit your colleges, applications early? And I know we're not able to get too deep because we can actually have a whole other webinar, and we will have one later on this summer. So we most certainly want to um, stay tuned later on this summer about the application process. But from a high level, Mindy, from your experience in counseling many students,
Mhm.
what would you suggest?
It's a question that comes up a lot. Students sometimes wonder if they might be advantaged if they submit their application several weeks before the deadline. My response to that has always been, and I think this proves true as I've transitioned back to the college side, is that the right time to submit your application is when it's ready and before the deadline. But not with any other strategic thinking beyond that. You can really do a bunch of mental gymnastics if you start thinking about, well, the college will, value me more if I apply a month ahead of time. That is I think a leap to conclusions that is not effective. That's a waste of your mental energy. Instead, direct your energy towards preparing the very best application, the most layered application you can, um, and um, and be sure that you leave time for the unexpected. So maybe if you wait until the application deadline, there could be a power outage at your house, or you might find that the common application is crashing or something like that. And colleges will often show grace, but you can't count on that. You want to make sure that you have prepared kind of a buffer of a few days at least to accommodate any potential challenges.
Excellent, excellent. I fully suggest that as well. And it also just depends too, on the type of institution. Some institutions do have a rolling admission process, right? Where they may be making admissions decisions as those applications are submitted. Or they may be admission institutions like Skidmore, where we look at all of our students per decision plan before making that decision. So that question will be, or the answer to that question, maybe it depends on the type of institution. But again, as Mindy suggested, using that primary source of the college, perhaps it's the website, perhaps it's your admissions counselor, to be able to learn a little bit more about what those specifics are. But again, stay tuned for us with us later on throughout the summer because we're going to get a little bit nitty gritty into the application process, right? And what to prepare for, such as what is early decision, what is regular decision, how does that influence financial aid, and so just know that we'll get into some of those topics as well. But there's an additional question, and I think we have time to answer this one additional question, which is about the personal essay. You know, choosing a topic, and I know that's a quick, fast, and hurry response. But Mindy and I just spent the weekend actually working with a group of students, right, talking through the essays, and so just kind of what would be some of your quick, responses and how to start that process, Mindy?
It's a great question. And I think the first thing to absorb is that there is no perfect essay topic. Um, there isn't any one angle that we are hoping to have you write about. And then when we see it, we say, oh, yes, here is the magic essay. It doesn't work like that. What we really want you to do is think about what you hope for us to understand about you, and then reveal that those values in a very detailed way. So often it can start with a very specific anecdote or story that kind of blooms outward to a illustration of what matters to you. But what I would recommend that you avoid is talking about anything too broadly or trying to jam in a bunch of topics because you think, well, I want the admissions office to know this and this and this and this and this, so I better jam it all into my essay. That will create a really superficial essay because you only have so many words to work with. Whereas if you go into great detail about one aspect of your life that you think is symbolic of who you are, you're going to create a much more dynamic piece of writing. Remember that good writing takes time. Leave space for revision, and do share your essay with trusted friends, family, but not too often because we want to hold on to your voice. And as I said before, ideally, if you handed it to your group of friends, you're writing to a group of friends, they would know immediately, oh, this is Janessa's essay for sure. I feel Janessa in this. That's the kind of reaction you want. And you also want to ask your friends, your peer group that you trust, what did you learn? Don't edit this, no line edits, don't get involved in that. Just what did you learn about me from this piece of writing? And if they report back that they've not learned anything that you hope to get across, then you know to drill down more deeply. So that's a good starting point for essays, but we could do a whole webinar on those as well.
Oh, absolutely. I hands down definitely mentioned that. And I'm glad that you asked that question and answered that question, Mindy, as well. So, again, thank you all so much for spending this hour with us talking about building your list. We talked about different resources to use. We talk about it taking ownership and having a values led experience, but also being open to what you may find and being able to understand that your interests may evolve over time and that it's okay for them to evolve, and also tools to stay organized. If you do have any questions after today, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. In the chat, I've shared a couple of links, one of which that was answering another question in the Q&A. regarding the business and music that may be specific to Skidmore, which is really wonderful. But also, if you're interested in taking a tour with us and being able to learn a little bit more about yourself, about us here in the beautiful city of Saratoga Springs, and so doing so in a way that's adding to your toolkit and to inform what's best for you. But again, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to engaging with you throughout our college success series throughout the summer. And Mindy, thank you again for sharing your expertise and your experience. And we're just so incredibly thankful for your time. Again, take care, you all.